Hey there, and welcome to Open Mind Safe Spaces, an initiative by Inspiron where we have conversations that are real, that are casual, and most importantly, that are very safe. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll have a wonderful journey of a lot of jokes, a lot of reacts, and the more we move forward, we're going to be touching upon very intense yet exciting topic to make sure that we are able to relate to you, that we are able to touch your souls, and we're able to make an impact. Moving on. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Yeah?
Fine.
Good. Right. Could you please quickly introduce yourselves?
I'm Manvi.
I'm Pravalika.
I'm Jonathan.
Hello, everybody. Could you also tell me a little bit about your backgrounds? What do you do? Where are you studying at?
I just graduated from OP Jindal Global University. I did liberal arts, but I majored in psych. And the reason I chose psychology is because I've benefited from counseling myself and I would love to provide that service for other people.
Wonderful.
I did my bachelor's from Mount Carmel College. I've chosen the combination of psychology and economics. I chose psychology and I feel that I belong here because I'm very curious and I love to explore with emotions and how each person reacts differently to it.
Super. Thank you so much.
I'm doing a master's in Christ College, and I chose psychology because I read a book when I was 13, and I think I just decided that this is what I want to do.
I think everybody who's chosen psychology has like some or the other reasoning to it. But what do you think about the current trends in psychology at the moment? Do you feel like people are choosing because they want to, or because it's more like a very romanticized career at the moment?
Some of them actually are choosing it because the other things AI will take over, but I feel that psychology might not.
That's good.
Interesting point. I feel like for a lot of people like that I've seen and interacted with, it is an option, maybe not the most considered one, especially when we come to larger classes and larger batches and people who have been told, oh, you need to choose a master's. It's just one option out of many.
I think it's definitely romanticized, but it's also a more employable field now, and we live in an economy, so...
No, I think it's very important. A lot of us or a lot of people do think that psychology should be a career that needs to be more of free service. But I think the amount of investment that we do in terms of time, in terms of our own mental and emotional strength in order to be there for another person very objectively does require some sort of monetization to it, so that the field is also taken seriously and it's not just any other advice that we tend to provide. But great, thank you so much. Welcome to Open Mind Safe Spaces. This is a podcast where we are going to keep things very casual. We're going to interact with people from the field of psychology, making sure that we are up to trends, we are understanding why we do what we do. Yes, this is a safe and a non-judgmental space. I think we can keep that common with us and everybody who's viewing. Yes?
Yes.
Great. All right. We have a few segments that we're going to cut this into. We're going to be reacting to some reels where I would want your expert opinions as well as about how you feel being students of psychology as to how social media is used in order to portray psychology and the trends that follow with it.
Yeah.
All right.
What happened, driver uncle?
बेबी पेट्रोल का पाइप फट गया।
Oh, great! You had it, oldie. Woo!
मैं कुछ समझा नहीं बेटी।
मेरा मतलब है आप कार ठीक करा के घर चले जाना, मैं किसी लिफ्ट लेके घर आ जाऊंगी, okay?
लिफ्ट?
Yo, where there's a will, there's a way, and there comes the bus.
Right. So that was quite a relatable reel. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm surprised. If anything, I feel like I've always had the opposite perspective, that like all the most mentally ill people take psych, and that psych students have the worst dating lives.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot of times, and I feel like based on prior evidence, this is very true.
I've also heard that psychology people are magicians and they feel that we can fix them immediately and they come with all of their issues.
Oh, that's happened to me. One time, this girl just straight up came up to me and asked, oh, can you read my mind? And I was like,
Oh yeah, you get that so much.
And then I get that meme, if you all have heard, Jin Tapaka Tum Tum.
Yeah.
And all the problems are over.
So I think this is more with respect to the friends end. But what do you think about family and relatives when they get to know about the fact that you do psychology?
They feel that we can read their minds. That's the most I've heard.
They ask if there's overdiagnosis these days, not realizing there's underdiagnosis in their generation.
Definitely. Wow, that's a very important point.
I think I come from like a family that has done counseling, been in the field of counseling for a while. So less of the more pointed questions that have come from outside the family, but yes.
Definitely. I think whenever you first chosen psychology, everybody's just like, why? I think with the real, right? You can treat your own, you can treat yourself, you can just go read your textbook and you're fine. I think that's one of the very common assumption that goes around. But like you mentioned, like every therapist also has a therapist and they also have their therapist and their therapist. It's a never-ending cycle. I don't think...
So who's the head therapist? Like, that's what I want to know.
Food chain to be like, how are you so sane at most of the time? But given actually the current, the concerns that keep coming up in the world, it's extremely important and it's very relevant for each of the therapists to also have a therapist. Because if you're not able to deal with our own concerns, how are we going to be objective in anybody's life? What do you think about that?
I think that'll inevitably lead to a lot of counter-transference and transference. Yeah.
I think it's really important that we consider that the therapist considers themselves human. Like,
Absolutely.
we are human, we are fallible, we have some of the same concerns, and we definitely need to be talking and getting treatment for those concerns. We're not above them. And I think relating to the real, a lot of people come into psychology, like it's less an outside perspective, more an insider perspective that, oh, I will learn psychology and I'll be able to help myself.
Right.
People feel that we are superhumans and we don't have any issues at all.
No, I think every psychology student in the beginning is just like, you know what, I've got this and I'm going to help myself like you mentioned, but towards the end of it, once they've done their bachelor's and then their master's and then anything that comes after it, everybody's just like...
They start doing practicum and then they realize...
Right. They understand the kind of depth that this particular field holds. I think it's very important for people to know.
I've also heard that people feel that psychologists are the biggest red flags because they feel that even with the minute problem, you'll be like, this is a disorder.
I've also heard that you can also manipulate your partners. I think that's where that conversation about you can't be very relationship type at the end of it. But I think that goes like how you beautifully mentioned that everybody is human at the end of the day, and it's not only for therapists to also understand but also for clients, I feel, because there's a lot of trust that they come in with, but we don't have all the answers. Like we're there to be very objective and provide you with all the skills and tools that you require in order for you to find out your answers. But that does not mean that we may not be going through it. But we just had the opportunity in order to cope with it, in order to address it and acknowledge it. That puts us in a position that our own emotions does not come in when they are discussing about their concerns.
I think another point that when she was talking about the stereotype of being manipulative in relationships, I think we are also not immune to hearing these and believing them or like worrying about them. I know there was a point in my life where I was like extremely like over-analyzing everything I did because I was wondering, oh my God, am I trying to manipulate my partner? What am I doing with my life right now? And I think, we're not immune to it. We're human just like everybody else.
Exactly. I think that element of self-gaslighting also goes into the picture because we're so confused with everything that everybody says and we become so empathetic that we're just going into everybody's shoes and we're like, okay, what is this person feeling? What is this person going through? What is this person thinking? It can be challenging as an early career therapist, but with time and with a little bit mojo, you get in terms with it as long as you have the right tools. And
I really like the fact that most courses, at least now there's clinical counseling, etc., make sure that you have mandatory therapy as a trainee.
Right.
And then supervision, of course, is very important once you step into the field and even as you continue. So I think those two are things that, you still have accountability and you're kept in check.
I think that's very, very important. Like as a psychologist myself, I would suggest that to anybody who is getting into the field. It's not even the point that you need to get yourself sorted or you need to fix your problem. There's no fix for it. This is coping. But the point that you just address it and you acknowledge it will not allow you to get triggered when somebody else is talking about a similar thing. So I think that's the first step that you need to take in order for you to be a lot more equipped with it. If you're not taking the medicines yourself, then it becomes a little hypocritical that we're in this position telling that, don't do this.
Just a wee bit.
Right, on to the next one.
Today, you can also get
Not being able to relax ever, crippling self-doubts, loneliness, and depression.
and with Anxiety Pro Giga Max,
Panic attacks.
the best part about it, it's free $99. So what are you waiting?
How many of you all know that content creator?
Definitely to follow him a bit.
Right. So his approach, I think, is more of creating more mental health awareness, but with a touch, or I think like a whole sprinkle of humor in it, which we can definitely see. Your eyes are sparkling, you're more happy and excited. But what do you think about humor as a way to kind of talk about topics related to psychology? Okay, so let me talk about why people may tend to use humor as a coping mechanism. I think, especially when it comes to the mental health topic, like there's a lot of stigma going around. So it's always better and easier and funnier to talk about it in a very relatable yet a jokey manner. So people would want to hear it. I think people get so triggered with the word mental health that the moment that they hear something, they scroll past through it and they're like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to deal with it at the moment because we don't want to get triggered. But the moment it's put on with, him twerking, with him, making it a little bit more funny, even though it may be triggering, but I think it changes our perception about that topic and it makes us want to look at it, relate and be like, yeah, even I do that. And it's free 99. Like everybody goes through anxiety. Like I go through anxiety. What about you all? Like I'm pretty sure everybody at one of the point of time does go through anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice approach to it. And like you said, we often go onto Instagram, onto different social media platforms to be entertained. And I know that I would definitely scroll past it if it came to me in a very heavy tone and just like, oh, this is what anxiety is. Oh, I suffer so much. Oh, this is so sad. And I think, the way he presents it is definitely very approachable. It's relatable to a broader audience. And a lot of people like that kind of content.
People usually the big words like depression, they only feel that it's related to sadness, and that might trigger other people also. When they put it in a funny way like this, they might feel that they might take it on a light note and in a funny way, and many people use it like for coping also.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think he utilized humor as an effective tool because complete vulnerability is difficult, and he definitely made it more fun and accessible and not just something we'd scroll past, like he said. But I think there's a fine line between like using humor to make content about this more accessible and spread awareness, but also laughing about more serious mental health related matters.
Definitely, I think there's like a very subjective view about it having to be something that's very serious as well, but also a little bit lighthearted so that people can understand, and bridging that gap between. So what do you think as humor, like as a coping mechanism that people tend to use, or like a defense mechanism at times also? Do you think it's good? Do you think, there's no good and bad. We don't want to, label them. But how do you think that may impact the importance of what they may want to convey?
I think I love that you said there's no good and bad, because there really isn't. There is only effective and ineffective. And I think humor can be very useful when, you're unsure about how to talk about a topic, or, you don't know how to broach it. But it can also, prolong how long you wait before you actually talk about it seriously. I think especially with our generation, not the genitals, but we make a lot of jokes about, death and depression. And I think it sometimes undercuts how serious these issues are to us, especially because it's not like we're not the ones suffering. We are, and there is plenty of reasons this is relatable to us.
Definitely, like you mentioned, that little fine line that's there, and it's about how you tend to deal it or you cope with it on your own.
I guess it differs from personality to personality. Some people use sense of humor for coping and it works for them. So I feel it differs from personality to personality.
Very subjective.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's arguably healthy to an extent, and then it's also arguably unhealthy to a further extent. But do you know this comedian, Daniel Sloss? In one of his specials, he had a really interesting perspective on it, and he's known for his quote-unquote dark humor. And he talked about how bringing humor to an uncomfortable or difficult situation is a way to bring joy to a situation in which it's lacking. I just think that's a very interesting take on it.
I think that's an interesting point. I also think that, I mean, you mentioned earlier that vulnerability is hard. I think vulnerability is also sometimes frowned upon.
Yeah.
And like, especially on social media. And so this is an interesting way to breach that topic without, being depressive.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting take on it.
I think so. There's this also concept that the moment that you change the perception about things as well, even though it is important and it is intense, it allows you to cope with it a little bit more better, because we're not just sitting with that thought and just letting it brew, but we're also acknowledging it. I think the first point of addressing any concern is acknowledgement, because we tend to deny, like, I don't have a problem, like anxiety, what is that? Stress and overthinking, I don't do that. Or we tend to label saying that I just overthink and this is just how my brain works. So either there's this tendency to label ourselves from both extremes, that there is no help out of it at all, or I don't go through it as well. But I think that vulnerability factor that you mentioned, it's extremely important that we do so. And as long as you can address it and acknowledge it in any way possible, but keeping in mind that it's not just talking about it, but once you do talk and you've found that right support to also work on it, allows you to, find that right balance between making it humorous, but also taking a few steps in order to address it in a better manner.
I think, it is a fine line after discussing, but acknowledging it versus, undercutting, or when we share these stories, when we share, the fact that people have anxiety and all, it's very relatable. It helps people acknowledge it. I think sometimes it can take away from how serious these things are. I mean, we've all at least have some passing knowledge of the idea of intrusive thoughts and the way it's been used, especially on social media, and the fact that it sometimes takes away from how difficult these challenges are for some people. And humor is very important too, I'm not denying that. But I think especially on social media, where the focus is on entertainment, sometimes instead of acknowledging, it can be a way to avoid.
And so how do we bridge that gap where we're not even avoiding, we're acknowledging, we're understanding the depth and importance of it, but also keeping it a little bit more lighter? I think we can't just make everything very light, like how you mentioned that we tend to move away from those topics of death and grief and anxiety or sadness. We go for more things like, I procrastinate, it's fine. I think there's also intensities to, stress is fine, procrastination is fine, perfectionism is absolutely all right and very necessary. But I think everybody going through some sort of it at any intensity needs to be addressed, and you can't compare and be like, she or she doesn't have it, I don't have it, he has it, she has it. I think that comparison, especially on social media, becomes a little bit more problematic.
I think modeling our lives after social media is where we will fail to see how important it is, because using humor on social media versus using humor in your everyday life, in your everyday conversations, is very different. So if personally, when people bring about and try to use humor in conversations like this, I will acknowledge the humor, obviously, but I also try to make space for it and keep in mind that, okay, this person may be struggling, maybe they didn't know how to bring it out, how to talk about it, but that's not something that I should completely move past.
Right.
And I think when we reflect on social media and Instagram itself, we have these 15 seconds, 30-second reels, and then we move past it.
Right.
And that's not something that needs to be done maybe in our everyday lives, in our real relationships with people.
Definitely, I think holding with that thought a little bit is very important.
And we exist in an attention economy. So whatever grabs your attention first is what you're going to focus on. And oftentimes humor is what grabs your attention first. You're much more likely to see a funny reel than someone talking about a genuine mental disorder they have. And also, with the rise of TikTok and Reels and YouTube Shorts, like our attention spans are fried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's also this tendency that we tend to get desensitized to issues. Like the moment that something starts off, we're very, very focused and we're into it, and we want to make sure that, we're addressing it, we're voicing out our opinions, we're talking about how we feel. But the moment that entire hype dies down, we also tend to take a back step to it, and we don't address it. But I think mental health, irrespective of whether it's out there, people are addressing or not, at an individual level, first we address it, and then we make sure that we're also providing that space for others to communicate and be empathetic. Not overly empathetic. Now suddenly you're also feeling what they're going through, which can lead to you also feeling overwhelmed. But providing that space. However, I think commenting, irrespective of how you feel, I think that supportive element needs to be there. So that when you go there and just scrolling, you'll see that there are a bunch of comments, there are a bunch of different views and perspectives about it. Yes, we want freedom of speech. We want to make sure that everybody can address it. But also creating that little bit of a supportive criticism, if there's a better word, right? What is that? Constructive criticism. To make sure that, you're addressing it, voicing out your views and opinion about it, but in a manner that actually helps the other person to not feel too bad about themselves. But if there is something that they need to acknowledge and change about, they can.
Like I said, social media and, a real versus a real person is so different.
Very different, definitely.
And I think it's when we tend to blur these lines. And I mean, real life reflects onto social media, and sometimes social media reflects onto real lives in a big way. Attention span is one, but how we deal and talk about issues is another thing. And it's just having that distinction is so important sometimes.
It's all about real versus real.
Yeah.
Yes.
Such a bad joke.
But I think, like how you all mentioned, what is going to be real plus what's going to be portrayed, I think it's like a longer discussion, which to like close it off, like how Blake Lively and the current interviews are going on. There's like a lot of drama going on around it. But I think that gives very clear indication of, like, it's a good example to show how people's personality may be different from what they may portray at times. But what we tend to do is we relate to the character that they portray and the kind of concerns that they bring forward to, where the person may not be going through. I think that's a clear distinction or the difference that comes into picture that's important to acknowledge as well.
It's also getting anxiety factor where people are constantly comparing themselves to the other people in social media, and they feel that so many times they're happy in front of the camera and sad behind, but we don't tend to see that thing.
Absolutely. I think that how you mentioned that acknowledgement is there because people want to deny. They're like, I don't have a problem. Do I have a huge problem? Finding that middle ground allows you to acknowledge what you're going through, and that's the first step in order for you to get any sort of help and support that you require.
And to all of you watching here, come close to the screen and listen. People don't have to like you. People don't have to love you. They don't even have to respect you. But when you look in the mirror, you better love what you see. You better love what you see.
Goosebumps. But I think that had a very powerful message, right? Because I think most of us, we're so preoccupied with the fact that we need other people to like us, love us, respect us, and value us, that we tend to forget to respect and love ourselves, which can become problematic.
So I also think like the concepts of self-love and self-care have grown up, and therapy in general has grown up in a very individualist culture. And so this form of I don't need anybody is like, I think, peak that culture. So, I mean, there are points to take, obviously. And the point about, respecting, loving yourself is very important. But I also think it's important to have that kind of temper when we think of these things.
Yeah.
When people are wanting to look love from their family and their friends or a partner, if they're not getting it, they'll go run for it. But I feel self-love should be taught to them and educated to them.
That's, I think, a good intervention to start with. Yes.
I think being super preoccupied with other people's opinions of you is not only being unfair to yourself, but also unfair to them, because how other people perceive us is none of our business. They're allowed to think whatever they want, and it may be true or untrue, but it is not up to us to change their minds. Like, all we can be is ourselves. And I think more than self-love, I think we should focus on self-efficacy and self-esteem first and foremost, and then progress to self-love.
I think one of the takeaways that I took from her is, I think, being assertive with yourself and with people can allow you to establish those boundaries that can give you the respect. So I think the point here that I'm trying to make is, definitely as social beings, we want to be loved and respected and valued. but the first step that we take for ourselves, wherein we are able to acknowledge our own concerns. Both are pros and cons. I think we are always either we're in extremes where like these are my strengths and this is what I can do, or we're in this extreme where we're like, this is my weakness and I can't do anything about it. And the moment that we show, and it's okay to show weakness, that's not the point, but when we address it and acknowledge it, or the way that we address it, I think a lot of us use dark humor in a way to be like, what, I'm okay with my weaknesses. But deep down, we know how hard and difficult it may be for the individual. But the moment you address it, you acknowledge it, and you're assertive with yourself in order to get the right help, get the support that you require in order to become more comfortable with it, I think you can empower yourself. And I think that's the first step to go about it.
No points.
What do you think are certain things that we can do right now, given again how social media has influenced the way that we need to dress a certain way, we need to think a certain way, we need to hop on with the trends that's currently there, we need to listen to the kind of music, dance like Ryan Reynolds, whatever the current trends are going on. So what do you think about social media playing the impact and influence in order to either impact the self-esteem, the self-confidence, as well as the self-efficacy?
I think social media is a very interesting tool, and I think it has its pluses and minuses. I think constantly broadcasting your life definitely can lead to some negative consequences. And like you said, it's a constant form of social comparison. And what she brought up, the point about not knowing what others are actually thinking about you. I think there is that the theory of social anxiety, where they talk about your internal audience, where you're being judged by what you presume to be the other, but you have no idea what they're actually saying. And I think a lot of social media is posturing. And so we have no idea what lives are actually like on social media, but it is what we portray and what we depict.
It's also that we might not be ourselves and we might people please, and depending on the trends, might be we are not that person, might be we still portray that because we should be accepted.
Definitely.
Yeah, and seeing a highlight reel of everyone's lives constantly where they look great and they feel great and they're traveling or partying or doing whatever creates a really false frame of reference for us to compare our own lives to.
I think, like you mentioned, it's a very skewed life that you tend to see because it's only about the positives of people having and enjoying their time, and very little. I'm not going to say that people don't share their grievances or the difficulties. You will see certain posts where they're talking about their concerns, their struggles, and they reach out for help. But it's skewed to a certain area where we're trying to constantly, conform to a particular social norm at most of the time. But I think valuing yourself, respecting yourself first, filling your own cup before you go and be like, hey, you know what, take everything that I have, I think is the first step in order for it to address.
I think speaking about humor too, a lot of the reason, like the way we talk about it on social media, especially for mental illness, anxiety, is with dark humor. I think is because we've lost a little bit of comfortability in being empathetic, in being there while people display vulnerability and weakness. And I think that comes out, and then we understand that. We understand that people are uncomfortable. So we often use humor in a way to make sure that, okay, you know what, just gonna let it be there.
That's actually a very interesting point that you've gotten, because not everybody is comfortable to do it. So we tend to, adapt or change in order to make sure that we're able to be there for the kind of person, which at times may help, but also at times just reduces the impact and the intensity or the importance of it, where people don't tend to take it seriously. I think striking that balance of where you keep it humorous and light, but also important and very serious, kind of helps you to address the concerns that you may be going through.
But it also gets social media as a plus point. It also gets awareness to a lot of people who have done various things where they have gotten self-love. Seeing that people who want to learn might adapt to those things and learn, which might create a change.
As long as it's good change, enough people are. I think one of the reels that I currently saw is there's this young man from a village, and his mother sells flowers at the temple. And he went on 3 days of hunger strike because he wanted an iPhone. Now, here social media has portrayed iPhone to be this gadget that is a sort of luxury, but that also creates a lot of fights. That also creates a lot of conflicts between family members. And I think that point, you could see, the mother in the interview being happy for the child, but also knowing the amount of effort that she had to go through in order to get that surplus amount of money in order to provide for the child. So I think regulating, understanding your a little bit of your limit, especially with the kind of content that you consume, with the kind of importance or the dependency that we may have on social media as well as other people, becomes important.
I also think that. Sorry.
So no, go ahead.
Yeah, when you're talking about people sharing their own stories, I mean, this might be just my own experience, but I've often found that people share this from a lens of oh, you know what, I'm settled, but here's what I did to help you. And I think that can create a very false impression of what human beings are actually like in day-to-day lives, which is we are messy and, we mess up a lot, and no one's got that perfect, I'm all settled, or that they claim to have. So
that leads to a lot of, again, expectations that we're like, oh, I'm supposed to do this, or we only show pictures when we organize things and not when it's messy. So that's a very important point. Let's just be ourselves and surround our people with people who we can be comfortable around. Thank you so much, guys, for your time, for your beautiful, beautiful insights. How are you all feeling? Like a quick feeling check.
Feeling pretty good. I mean, this was interesting for something that, not a lot of planning that I was told about, but I love the conversation. I love the space that we had.
I love the honesty. Thank you.
Always wanted to do a podcast.
Yeah.
So it was great that we could give our perspectives to it.
So happy to become a podcast bro. Finally. Yeah. Feel like we all spat some solid bars.
Oh, definitely. I think we can all agree to the fact of how anxious and the anxiety was on top. But you guys did a great job. Thank you so much for sharing all your lovely thoughts. Thank you so much for being here, participating, listening to everybody. I think like quick takeaways is acknowledgement, quick takeaways is communication, effective communication, being yourselves. But if you have any last words, you have your camera right there.
Don't forget to like,
share,
subscribe.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Tune in next episode and we'll have more fun conversations, keeping it casual, keeping it safe.